Okay, we can start again the hearing. At the beginning, please accept on behalf of also the panel my apologies for the poor quality of the interpretation. We had a number of problems with the interpretation. You know, it was a technical problem on preparing and arranging the Chinese-English interpretation, and maybe we'll try to have some technical arrangement to do better. And now we can ask the first WADA witness, Mr. Stuart Kemp, who is not yet in the room. Please, somebody could accompany Mr. Kemp in the room. Thank you, Mr. Kemp. You can take your seat. And first of all, as I said to the other witness, you know already, I suppose, but I repeat, you should tell us all the truth, talking about facts, event, not about impressions, speculations, and so on and so forth. With that, I give the floor. I suppose Mr. Wagner will be first to ask question. Oh,
it's
no,
me.
Mr. Young, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ask question, please.
Mr. Kemp, have you reviewed your witness statement that was submitted in this matter?
Yes, I have.
Do you want to make any changes to it?
No, I do not.
Okay. We only have 10 minutes, so can you give the panel a brief description of your expertise related to the issue of doping control notification?
Sure. My current role at the World Anti-Doping Agency is I'm the Deputy Director of Standards and Harmonization. Prior to that, I managed WADA's testing program, so have experience with managing several anti-doping organizations and the way that they conduct doping controls worldwide. Prior to that, and my experience at WADA, I worked for the Canadian Anti-Doping Agency where I managed their testing program, and that also entailed acting as a doping control officer myself. Specifically for reference to today, I've been involved with the drafting of the International Standard for Testing since all of its versions from 2009, and have also been responsible for the drafting of the guidelines related to blood sample collection, urine sample collection, as well as the training of sample collection personnel.
Is the audit function of the International Standard for Testing and Investigations also under your jurisdiction?
That's right. So our department also takes care of audits worldwide of both national anti-doping organizations and international sport federations, where we review in detail the operational practices of agencies.
And would those operational practices include notification procedures?
In many instances, yes. It's not a detail that we review in the field, but we certainly review documentation about how that's to be performed.
Okay. If I was a code signatory like FINA or the Swiss Anti-Doping Agency, and I had a question about how to interpret the, I'll call it the ISTI, the International Standard for Testing and Investigation, requirements on athlete notification. If I called WADA, who would they tell me to talk to answer that question?
They'd likely redirect you to me as having been involved with the drafting of the standard.
Okay. Then, good. Let me ask you a question. If I'm FINA and I want to give a document to IDTM authorizing them to collect samples on my behalf, do I need to name in that document the athlete that I want to have, a specific athlete that I want to have samples collected from, and do I need to name the members of the sample collection team that are going to collect those samples?
No, you do not. The IF, or FINA in this case, would need to provide general authorization that a test can be conducted under their rules. Such a document would include the rules under which, the jurisdiction under which the test was taking place, but it would be very difficult to identify a specific athlete or doping control officer that would conduct the test, given it's typically delegated to a third party. So the authorizing IF wouldn't even know who the doping control officer might be. Furthermore, it would be difficult to name the athlete in many instances. Take an in-competition testing scenario, for example, where an athlete might be selected because they came first in a race, or they were randomly selected in a race. You don't know the athlete's name until they've finished their performance. Therefore, it would be almost impossible to name the athlete in advance. Similarly, in many competitions and out-of-competition tests where multiple tests are taking place at the same time, there might be multiple doping control officers involved, and they would process a sample based on their availability when an athlete arrives at the doping control station. So for those two reasons, it may be best practice to include those types of details, but it's certainly not a requirement.
If I'm IDTM and I have a doping control team, do I need to give the nurse phlebotomist and the chaperone, which IDTM calls the DCA, any documentation that links them back to IDTM as an agent of IDTM?
No, you do not. IDTM would need to have the general authorization from FINA or any other IF that they're working for, and then that general authorization would apply to all sample collection personnel. And in the cases of chaperones and blood collection officials, their role, their scope within the collection process is very limited, and therefore that's not necessary.
What was your role in connection with the 2014 sample collection personnel guidelines?
So our staff within our department were responsible for drafting that, and as the individual primarily involved with the drafting of the standard, I oversaw that initiative, and those guidelines are constantly being updated on a regular basis based on feedback that we get from stakeholders and to ensure that they reflect best practice.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I review those guidelines, they say that the chaperone and the blood collection officer should have identification that links them back to the sample collection authority. Is that right?
That's right. So again, as best practice, it would be preferable that that was the case, but for the instances I cited earlier, it may not be possible in all cases.
Okay. Then, if that was what you wrote in the guidelines, why didn't you put the same language in the mandatory international standard?
Right. So as is the case with all of the standards under the World Anti-Doping Code, you have basic requirements, and then the level 3 documents, the guidelines, are there to help implement practice. Obviously, we'd like to promote best practice, but we recognize that different anti-doping organizations and sample collection agencies worldwide implement those requirements differently, and that's why we constantly adjust those best practice documents, but we did not want that to be a requirement.
Based on your experience, are there a significant number of sample collection bodies, either anti-doping organizations or third-party service providers, who would not follow the procedures that Sun Yang's team are saying are required under the ISTI?
Yeah, as I mentioned, practice is very the important element in terms of complying with the International Standard for Testing and Investigations is that the general authorization is available to all sample collection personnel, but no, there need not be individual authorization or accreditation for all personnel.
Okay. Have you reviewed the FINA letter? It's at Volume 3, Tab 8.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And is that a sufficient authorization from FINA to IDTM to collect samples from swimmers, and in particular, Sun Yang?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Take a look at the WADA letter at Volume 3, Tab 25. What is that?
So this is a similar authorization letter. In this case, it would be a test authorized by the World Anti-Doping Agency. Again, it's a general authorization letter that is not specific about the doping control personnel who will be collecting the sample, because WADA would subcontract the tests. We don't conduct testing ourselves, and therefore we have no idea who the doping control officer will be that will conduct these tests, only that they'll do so in accordance with our agreement, which includes adherence to the ISTI. This letter may be a little bit more specific about the type of sports, but again, it's a general letter that does not include the DCO or the name of the athlete.
Okay. And in the bottom of that letter, it refers to information to be provided by the DCO. What's the purpose of that?
The purpose of that is that you know that you're dealing with a real individual, somebody with official identification, not even an identification from a sample collection agency, but something that's widely recognized, like a passport, like a driver's license, something where the athlete has the opportunity to validate that this is a real person, and should they be documenting their concerns about the process, they have a record of who this individual was.
Okay. Have you seen the identity card issued by IDTM to the DCO in this case?
Yes, I have, and that's here in the documents as well.
And would that satisfy the requirement you've just described?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only would it, but it, again, would be best practice.
Okay. Let me take you to the ISTI. And particularly to Article 5.4.2, subsection B. I think.
Which tab is that, please?
It would be Volume 1, Tab 4. Or, I had the damn thing.
That's not the right one in the witness bundle. Is it in the witness bundle?
Witness bundle, Tab 4,
Witness bundle 2, tab 4.
Yeah, this is your last question, Mr. Young. Since the time expired, you will have another round of 5 minutes at the end. Please conclude. On the question, Andy will answer.
My question is, I would like you to take me through Article 5.4.2 and Article 5.3.3 and explain the drafting intent that goes with those words.
Sure. Well, starting with 5.4.2, the element here is about ensuring proper notification of an athlete, that they're aware of their rights, their responsibilities in the doping control process, and that begins with the individual notifying the athlete of their selection for doping control. Be it a chaperone or a doping control officer, they must identify themselves, articulate the rights and responsibilities of the athlete. That includes knowing who has authorized the test itself, and if need be, they would make reference to the official documentation under which they've been authorized to notify the athlete for selection.
Okay, and in sub B, identify themselves. Is that meant to apply to anyone other than the chaperone or the doping control officer?
It would be the individual responsible for the actual notification process, which may be the doping control officer or the chaperone, but only one individual.
And is this the only place in the ISTI where the doping control team is required to show papers to the athlete?
It's the only place where it's required, but of course, if the athlete wished to see it at any point, they'd be entitled to do so, but it would be the same document that was provided here under 533.
That refers to Article 5.3.3.
Yes.
Look
I
at
have to
that
object.
quickly.
I have to object.
Please.
First of all, it's a leading question, and you said it was his last question, and I think
Yeah.
he's had about 5.
Yeah, maybe Mr. Young, you can kindly conclude, and then I will pass back the floor to you after the other councils have counter-interrogated. Please, Council of Mr. Sun Yang. Mr. Vitto, who is taking the floor, or Mr. Mikin? 15 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp, my name's Ian Meakin. I'm counsel for Sun Yang. I'm going to ask you some questions based on your expertise and your witness statement. I refer particularly to paragraph 7 and 8 of your witness statement that you filed here, which is in the witness bundle, tab 13. I don't know if you have it, but it's witness bundle 1, tab 13.
Thank you.
You got it? And you see paragraph 7, you say, the documentation shown by the sample collection personnel satisfies the notification requirements set forth in the ISTI. You see that? So you've been shown what we understand to be what was shown to Mr. Sun Yang on the night of the 4th of September. Is that correct?
Yes, the general letter from FINA.
Okay. And in paragraph 8, you say that the ISTI does not require this additional documentation to be carried by or shown to the athlete during the sample collection session. You see that?
I'm not referring to the letter. We're referring to additional documentation related to
in
the
paragraph 8, that's right. You're referring to additional documentation which may or may not be shown, as the case may be.
Correct.
That's your view. If
No,
I
it's not my
understand it
view.
correctly.
It's the standard.
Yeah, I'm going to
requires
come back to
7.
that, but I just wanted to have you confirm that there's nothing there that you want to change.
No.
Okay, so can you now take it's binder 2, you had it on direct, it's binder 2, tab 4.
Sorry, there's no tab 4 in binder 2.
It's tab 4 out of 4.
Yes, thank you.
And if you can turn to page 81. 81,
Yep.
which is Annex H, sample collection personnel requirements. You see that?
Yes, I do.
And if you see at H2, it talks about scope, and it says sample collection personnel requirements start with the development of the necessary competence for sample collection personnel and end with the provision of identifiable accreditation. So I just signal identifiable accreditation because now I'm going to put some questions regarding what constitutes identifiable accreditation.
Sure.
Okay. If you can stay in tab 4, but go back to page 26.
Of the standard.
Yeah, in the same tab. And in the middle of the page, you'll see a paragraph which starts with the bold title, Sample Collection Personnel. So that's page 26. So I know you've got it, but I'm waiting for the panel to get it as well. It's good? And it says, this is a collective term for qualified officials authorized by the sample collection authority to carry out or assist with duties during the sample collection session. You see that?
Yes, I do.
So would it be fair to say that to interpret carrying out would be referring to a DCO or a BCO, and assist would be referring to a DCA or a BCA? Would you agree with that?
It would be dependent on the specific role that they're playing within the collection process.
Okay, I accept that. So, for example, a blood officer is there to actually take blood, whereas a DCA is there to assist because that's his title. And in the present case, that was the urine assistant, if you recall, who was an assistant. So he's assisting, but the DCO is actually carrying out. Okay?
Right, they're responsible.
Okay, and now I'll take you to page 44 of the same tab. And I'll take you to paragraph 5.3.3, which starts with sample collection personnel. You see that?
Yes, I do.
I'm sure you're familiar with it, but I'm going to read it out for the record. Sample collection personnel shall have official documentation provided by the sample collection authority, evidencing their authority to collect a sample from the athlete, such as an authorization letter from the testing authority. DCOs shall also carry complementary identification, which includes their name and photograph, i.e. identification card from the sample collection authority, driver's license, etc., etc. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Now I'd like to take you to tab 56, which is in a different binder. It's in the binder just to your left, I think, tab 56. Actually, no, it's in binder number 4. It's the thin one.
Yep.
And I think it's the first exhibit in that bundle. This is a letter of authorization. You would agree with that? Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a letter of authorization, but it is
well, that's what
a document
it's called,
that could
isn't
be
it?
used as such, yes.
Okay, so I accept your answer. And this actually is a letter of authorization for the testing of the athlete Sun Yang. Right? And here we see that the DCO is mentioned. Can you see that?
Yes, I do.
Is that normal?
As I said before, there's different ways to implement the requirement. This would be one. Some organizations include the athlete's name. Many do not, however, because in most instances, more than one athlete is being tested at a time. And
Right.
in those instances, we don't want to disclose other athletes that are being tested for
Right,
privacy
but
reasons.
we know that the testing that took place with Sun Yang was an out-of-competition test. Okay, so it's not about somebody who's just finished a race and he's
I'm
being
answering
tested.
the question in very general terms.
Yeah, I know you did. I'm aware of that, but we're talking about an out-of-competition test, and this was the authorization which FINA gave with regard to the testing of Sun Yang. And we see that the DCO is mentioned. So I come back to my term that I used earlier, which is identifiable accreditation, which is, we can see that, you know, the name of the doping control officer is mentioned in this doping control authorization. You see that?
I see that.
Yeah. And we don't see the name of the BCA or the DCA. They're not mentioned in this form.
Absolutely, nor do they need to be.
Right. Well, they could be, but your evidence says, if I understand you correctly, that they don't need to be.
I'm articulating that the standard only requires that the name of the organization authorizing the test is required.
Right. So, so how would you show to the athlete that the DCA or the BCA, or both of them, were in a possession of identifiable accreditation?
Well, as you point...
Let's arguendo, imagine that this form had been shown to Sun Yang on the night, right?
Right.
Now, it wasn't, but, and I mean, I appreciate you weren't there, you're here as an expert, but it's not contested what was shown to Mr. Sun Yang on the night. But arguendo, had that been shown to him on the night, in order to have identifiable accreditation for the other officers, there would have to be some additional documentation provided, correct?
To be very clear, sample collection personnel is a general term that refers to all personnel involved in the collection process. The standard only requires that the doping control officer has named evidence to their accreditation. Therefore, having reference to presenting, I can't remember the term that you used earlier, the relevant authorization or the relevant accreditation, it would be only relevant to those that are required to have it, and that's the doping control official.
Okay, now can you turn to tab 52, which is in the different binder. It's in the binder with the most numbered documents, which I think is file number 3. If you can turn to tab 52, these are the WADA guidelines.
Yep.
And if you can, can you turn to page 17 of that document, please? One seven.
Yes.
You have it?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and you see that the main heading is evidence of accreditation. Mm-hmm. So when I was talking about identifiable accreditation, here we have the WADA guidelines. The second paragraph begins authorization letter. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it says, in the absence of a sample collection authority issued photo ID, the chaperone may use government issued photo ID accompanied by a sample collection authority authorization letter. You see that?
I do.
Right. So, based on the document I showed you before, which was the FINA authorization to test Sun Yang,
Yep.
where the DCO's name is mentioned, but the BCA and the DCA's name is not mentioned. Based on this, which is the definition used in authorization letter, what's required, is it not, is that either, because this is about chaperones, this is not about the DCO, this is about the chaperones, so they're the people assisting the DCO. So either the BCA and the DCA have to have had a sample collection authority photo ID, which would be, in the present case, a IDTM card with their photograph on it, or they would have to be included in the letter of authorization. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
No, I wouldn't agree with that at all. I strongly disagree with that. You're making reference to a guideline document that outlines best practice. This is not a requirement, and if you read the scope section on page 4 of the same document, it clearly outlines as much and says that if there's any discrepancy between this guideline and the IST prevails, and of course that's because that's where the requirements are held.
Okay, so I'll just stop you there, if I may, because the whole issue I'm trying to get to is identifiable accreditation. Now, we can have a different view on what that constitutes, and it's for this learned panel to decide, you know, what it is, but I just need your help based on your expertise and on the evidence in the file,
Right.
and what happened when Sun Yang was notified. And that's why we're all here, because as you know, the testing was aborted, and you know that there's been consequences arising as a result of, you know, what happened on that night. So, can I now take you to tab 31, which is in the same binder? You have it?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, this is the letter of authority which was shown, which was FINA's letter of authority which appointed or delegated testing to IDTM. You see that? And that, just, I think you know this, but that was what was shown to Sun Yang on the night. Okay?
Okay.
And then if you can go over the page to tab 30, that was the other those were the other documents that were shown to Sun Yang on the night. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we've got the DCO's IDTM card, we've got a nursing certificate, and we've got an ID. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, over the page again to tab 31, In this letter of authority, there's no mention of the officers who were going to conduct the test, is there?
As is not required, correct.
And there's no mention of the athlete either.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Meakin, you have 1 minute, 1 minute and a half.
Last question. You refer in your witness statement to customary practice. You refer in your witness statement to customary practice. You mentioned best practices just now, but you're talking about customary practice. Is that a term that's used in the ISTI rules?
No, I think I used the term customary just to imply that there are different practices for implementing the same requirement.
Right, and it's not in the water code or the water guidelines either, is it?
The word customary?
Yeah, customary practice.
No, the ISTI is very much based on the requirements themselves, not on customary practice. I'm merely just trying to outline in my statement that there are different ways of doing things, and the way that IDTM conducted this test is customary practice or usual practice.
Okay, so the answer is no, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now the FINA Council, Mr. Vitto, like to ask questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will first have a question, a follow-up question on what you said before. You said that the chaperone and the BCO have a limited scope of activity during the sample collection. Could you please explain us what the BCA in the case at hand would have had to do if he had to perform his duties?
Sure. So the blood collection official under the standard and under the guidelines, their primary role is to perform venipuncture, to collect the blood sample from the athlete and provide any aftercare that would be required.
Just my question is that in the case at hand, the chaperone, what would have it been its role in the case at hand?
The role of the chaperone?
Yeah, the
Well,
BCA.
Sure. I'm not privy to all the details of this particular case beyond what I've read, but chaperones always have the involvement of either notifying an athlete and or witnessing the passing of a urine sample, all under the supervision of the qualified doping control officer.
And what do you mean by passing of the sample?
So this would be a role for the chaperone or the doping control officer when and if the athlete provides a urine sample, that they are witnessing the passing of that sample.
Okay. And for the BCO, what is its role?
As I mentioned, their role is limited to venipuncture, collecting the physical blood specimen, and providing any necessary aftercare.
But do you think that it is really limited activities, or is it not the main activities?
When
and the more sensitive for the athlete?
When I refer to being limited, I mean that those are the scope of their activities within the broader doping control process.
But you accept that it's a sensitive part of the sample collection process?
Absolutely. The entire process is a sensitive process.
And don't you think that the athlete has the right to be sure that these persons have been trained, educated, and that have been appointed by the sample collection authority?
They have the right to know who is conducting the sample and, the sample collection, and that's why the authorization letter includes those details so that any concerns can be raised with that organization.
Okay. Now let's turn to the general letter of authority. This is tab 31. So this is the letter from FINA to IDTM delegating its power. This is the thin one, I think. I don't know, not the thin one. Can you explain us what would be the document to be shown to the athlete if the sample collection authority is also the testing authority?
There would be no additional document. It would merely be the accreditation from that sample collection agency. So it's a requirement for the sample collection agency to show documentation that informs the athlete where they have derived their authority to conduct the test, and that is this document in tab 31.
Okay, so if there is no delegation of power, it's only the DCO to show its ID card.
Could you rephrase that?
if there is no if the testing authority is also the sample authority, so this document should not be shown. So the authorization documentation is only the DCO showing its IDTM ID card.
If the testing authority was the same as the sample collection agency, such documentation would still be required. It just wouldn't be making reference to a third party. It would be referencing itself as having the responsibility to collect samples.
Now, can you please turn to tab 56? This is the thin binder.
Yes.
So could you please explain us what is the purpose of this document?
So this is a generic authorization letter that can be used. So it's a non-mandatory document that can be used. Many organizations, when they plan tests, they use what's referred to as the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System. So it's an online tool for housing doping control information. If an organization wishes, they can generate a template authorization letter that pulls information from atoms on the date range of the test, the type of samples to be collected, who is to be tested, and so on. So it's a tool that WADA provides for ADOs to use, but it's a non-mandatory document.
Okay. And who are the addressees of this document?
I beg your pardon?
Who are the addressees of this
Who are
document?
the addressees? This would be provided to whoever is responsible for collecting the sample. So if this was generated by FINA, they would provide it to the service provider collecting samples.
Yes, but the first box, it's written to. So who are the addressees?
So in this case, it could be shown to athletes, coaches, administrators, and athlete support personnel. So again, this refers to the best practice that our other council referred to in terms of providing more detailed information. This gives possibility to that.
Okay, so according to best practice, this document would be shown to the athletes or his entourage.
It could be in appropriate circumstances, but most often multiple athletes would be listed on such a mission order, especially in this instance where a third party is collecting samples. Most likely FINA or other IFs wouldn't provide customized letters for each athlete, but would rather all athletes being tested in a particular location or sport during a time period would have a number of athletes, and that's why it wouldn't be shown, but absolutely it could be shown to an athlete.
So you have mentioned that the practice from IDTM and other third-party providers do not have to be in accordance with the guidelines.
No, provided the requirement is met, then they have conducted their operations in accordance with the standard.
In our case, the requirements of the guidelines, the sample collection personal guidelines in particular, were not met.
Okay.
It's a question.
Well, again, I only have reference to the documentation I've been provided, but they did not provide this level of detail. So no, the name of the athlete, the name of the doping control officer, the name of the chaperone, and the name of the BCA were not in the IF letter, but I reiterate that the IF would have no way of knowing who those individuals were when they authorized the test.
Okay, but in the guidelines, it is specifically written that the chaperone or the BCO have to have either an ID card from the sample collection authority or an authorization letter.
I hate to play semantics with a lawyer, but it says should, not shall. It's a level 3 document, which means it's not binding, it has no legal status. It would be best practice, but is not a requirement.
Do you accept that IDTM is one of the most important third-party providers for sample collection?
They are one of the most active sample collection agencies worldwide.
So IDTM practice is in contradiction with your guidelines?
I don't know the extent to which they adopt the guidelines across the board, or if this is an isolated case. I can't speak to that.
But why don't you change your guidelines if they are not respected by any of the third-party providers?
I can't say that they're not respected by all third parties.
But
we
for this specific issue, of course.
It's been a very deliberate decision to make a distinction between what's in the requirements of the standard and what's in the suggested practice in the guideline. And as I mentioned before, it would be very onerous to put in place these types of requirements for specific types of testing scenarios. And the ISTI requirements apply to all testing, both in competition and out of competition. So by way of example, if a targeted test were to be authorized by FINA or another body, and they did not put together documentation, but rather they picked up the phone and called IDTM or another service provider and said, we need athlete X tested at this location at this time, they will not be able to put in place such documentation. Furthermore, at a major event like a FINA World Championships or at an Olympic Games, where you're testing athletes based on their performance, not based on their name, there is no possible way of putting together such
But this
documentation.
is in competition.
And that's why the requirements
Mr.
are
Vito,
general.
2 minutes left, please.
So, so there is a customary practice from IDTM, and do you know if there is a document attesting from this customary practice?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the
Do you
question?
know if IDTM has produced or WADA has produced any regulations or rules or document that attests, that confirms the practice from IDTM? The way they
Sure.
operate.
So our responsibility, especially with respect to the audits that were referenced earlier, is we evaluate the practices of international federations and national anti-doping organizations. And by way of example, we did conduct an audit of FINA recently, and this practice did not come up as an issue whatsoever.
Okay. So, but has IDTM provided WADA with any document explaining how they operate?
Have they provided that to WADA?
Yeah.
We haven't asked for it because, of course, the ultimate responsibility lies with the federation that decides to employ the third-party service providers. So if anything, we would be evaluating the practices of that client, in this case, FINA.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. Now back to Mr. Young for 5 minutes.
Mr. Kemp, would you look at Article 5.3.3 of the ISTI? It's Volume 1, Tab 4 in your witness bundle. It's page 44.
Sorry, Bundle 2?
It should be Volume 1, Tab 4 of your witness bundle. From Bundle 2, yeah. Good. Suzanne, go ahead.
Sorry. Number 1 here. This one.
It's WADA Exhibit 4 if the panel's looking for it.
Thank you.
Page 44, 5.3.3. Tell me when you've got it.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go through that, and you can tell me what was the intent in drafting. And let me just pick pieces of it. Sample personnel shall have, and then it talks about official documentation provided by the sample collection authority, evidencing their authority. What is meant by sample collection personnel shall have, whatever this is, evidencing their authority?
It means that as a collective group, the personnel involved with the testing mission must have some form of documentation providing their authorization to conduct a test. It may take the form of a letter of authority. It may take the form of the Adams-generated letter that Mr. Vito made reference to. There are different ways of implementing that practice, and that's why the provision itself refers to such as an authorization letter.
Okay. Does it mean that each of the sample personnel shall have such documentation evidencing their authority?
No, it means because sample collection personnel is a defined term and it's defined as the collective, it means that the collective must have documented authorization, not bespoke.
And you were asked about H2 in the annex, which says sample collection personnel shall have identifiable accreditation.
That's right. So those who require it under 5.4 would need to make that available, and that's the doping control officer.
Okay. It says official documentation provided by the sample collection authority such as an authorization letter from the testing authority. That's a single document?
Yes.
Okay. Is the letter, single letter, satisfy the official documentation?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And when it says to collect a sample from the athlete, does it need to have the name of the athlete on that document?
No, it does not. And had we wished that to be the case, we would have absolutely included that within the language of the standard. But no, that is not a requirement.
And so, if you have a letter that identifies a group of swimmers or all swimmers, would that satisfy the athlete language in this document?
If their name was included on the document, yes.
Okay. So, Council has made a big point of the difference between authorization letters and letters of authority. And in their brief, they even capitalized those terms. There is, do you see a reference, or is there any reference in the ISTI to something called a letter of authority?
No, I don't believe there is. The only reference to such a document is here in 5.3.3, and that is that there must be some form of official documentation, and example is given with an authorization letter, but that is preceded by the words such as to give an example of what such documentation might look like.
Have you been
One minute, please, Mr. Young.
Okay, have you been aware of any difference between, well, first, authorization letter, is that a defined term?
No, it's not.
The term letter of authority isn't used. Are you aware of any difference between an authorization letter and a letter of authority?
No, I'm not.
And in the second sentence, where it says DCOs shall carry complementary identification, did you mean to have chaperones and blood collection officers or assistants have to carry specific identification?
No, again, otherwise it would be within this provision.
That's fine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. I have a final clarification request to you. After what you said, a final precise answer. What legal authority, in your view, do the WADA guidelines have?
In my view, and under the World Anti-Doping Code, they have no legal status whatsoever.
Okay, please, Philip.
Tab 31, the one-page letter. The FINA Letter of Authority 2018. We've looked at it already. I think you know which one I'm talking about. How typical is that letter?
It's very standard from all IFs, especially those that work with third-party service providers, because they would be providing a generic letter that could be used regularly in any situation, rather than having to customize a letter for one of perhaps thousands of tests that would be conducted each year.
If I could take you to your own witness statement, which is at tab 13 if you want to look at it again. You put a couple of tables at the end of it, and the first table sets out the total number of tests, samples that are taken over a 2.5-year period, 3-year period nearly, 139,309. You can't tell us with any precision, I assume, but for those takings, how often would the letter of the kind that we've just been looking at be used? Are you able to give us a sense?
I'd be reticent to speculate, as I don't have an accurate number.
And relatedly, in relation to your next table, over the page, it might be worth just having a look at it. You give the samples collected from Mr. Sun Yang. I asked him questions about this, 180 in total, 117 out of competition, 63 in competition.
Yes, I'm familiar with that table.
And 60 of those were taken by IDTM. Again, are you able to say anything about the kinds of letters that were used in those 60? I put some questions to Mr. Yang. he was not able to recall, but can you tell us anything about that?
Again, I can't speak to each instance, but I do now understand that this is typical practice of IDTM to be showing only the letter of authority. So I think it would be safe to assume that those 60-odd tests by IDTM would have been conducted in the past in the very same manner.
On the basis of the documentation that was made available, that's your testimony?
Based on the available documentation, yes.
In this case, we've had evidence, and I'm not expressing any view on it, whether it's established or what its consequence would be, but we have had evidence before us that the chaperone took photographs of Mr. Yang. Given your role, how typical would it be for a chaperone to be taking photographs of an athlete?
It would not be a typical practice whatsoever. Chaperones are to be well trained, including going through the various scenarios and what they would be prohibited from doing, and it would not be acceptable practice whatsoever for a chaperone to be taking photographs in a doping control station. I don't know if that's the case here, but as a general training requirement, chaperones are strongly encouraged to keep their phones to themselves.
Let's assume that it did happen, that photographs or videos were taken. In your testimony to us, what should happen in those consequences?
There's no requirement that addresses this. I think best practice would certainly be that chaperone was asked to put the photographs away. As simple as that.
And what ought to be the consequence in terms of the procedure that is then to be followed? I suppose what I'm asking, just as an outsider, the idea of a chaperone taking photographs, if that happened, is obviously not ideal and probably highly inappropriate. In those circumstances, what is an athlete entitled to do on your interpretation of your rules?
Sure. I think in that instance, the athlete would absolutely be entitled to express any concerns they have. And with any other element of the doping control process, they'd be encouraged to document those concerns so that they were brought to the attention not only of the sample collection agency, but also the IF concerned.
In your testimony to us, because you don't express it you don't address this aspect, and it's not a criticism in any way, you weren't presumably asked to address it. Are there any circumstances in which, on such an apparent breach of protocol, the athlete would be entitled to take matters into her or his own hands and say, you have, in your process, violated a requirement, and I'm therefore bringing to a summary conclusion this exercise?
Sure. So the hypothetical issue of photography in a doping control station is not outlined as a requirement. I think it's just generally accepted as being bad practice and inappropriate during such a personal situation. But ultimately, it would be up to the independent judiciary to address that matter, and athletes would be encouraged to comply with the process regardless.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your answers. I think we can conclude your testimony. Mr. Tudor Popa is invited to enter the room, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. So, Mr. Popa, please take your seat. As far as we know from the documents, you were in contact with the DCO by telephone during the relevant evening. So I recall to you the importance and the need to tell the truth, all the truth, and to talk about facts, event, by avoiding any kind of speculations, impressions, and so on and so forth. And with that, I pass the floor to, I don't know if Mr. Young or Mr. Reigner. Please, Mr. Reigner, you have the floor.
Hello, Mr. Papa.
10 minutes. Please, go ahead.
Could I ask you to look at Witness Bundle 1, tab 14?
I assume it's okay with the panel and council if we have somebody expedite the opening of pages.
So is that bundle, is that file 2, tab?
1.
Bundle 1?
Witness statement.
Witness Bundle 1,
Yes.
tab 14. Can you confirm that is a statement you prepared on or about 7 September 2018?
Yes.
And do you confirm that statement is true and accurate to the best of your memory and knowledge?
Yes.
And if you could look at the next tab, 15.
Okay.
Do you confirm that is a statement you prepared on or about 8 November 2018?
Yeah, that's correct.
And do you confirm that statement is true and accurate to the best of your memory and knowledge?
Yes.
What is your current title at IDTM?
My current title is Program Manager.
And did you have the same title and duties in September of 2018?
Yes, I have the same title.
In that position, what were your duties with respect to the sample collection process on 4 September 2018 involving Mr. Sun Yang?
I coordinated the test. I created the mission order, assigned the doping control officer, and on that specific night, I helped the doping control officer when she needed assistance.
Now, the 3 persons on the sample collection team on 4 September 2018, the doping control officer, the blood collection assistant, and the doping collection assistant, had all 3 of those persons been trained and authorized by IDTM to
Yes.
perform their respective duties in the sample collection?
Yes, they were part of the doping control team assigned for this test.
Let me ask you a few questions about the doping control assistant for that sample collection. What duties did he have for that specific sample collection?
His role was strictly to witness the sample passing from athlete's body to the collection vessel. And after that, the DCO would take over again.
And specifically just the urine sample, correct?
Yes, it's a doping control assistant for urine collection.
What, if any, records did IDTM have regarding training of the doping control assistant for that duty?
Could you please repeat? I couldn't hear it very well.
What, if any, records did IDTM have about the training that DCA had received for that duty? Is there a form that IDTM collects for that purpose?
Yes, once a doping control officer registers a doping control assistant into the system, they have to send us a document from the assistant. It's a statement of confidentiality that confirms that they were trained and they were informed about their rights and responsibilities. And this statement of confidentiality is signed by the doping control assistant.
And if I could have you look at Witness Bundle 2, I believe it's Volume 3, tab 15.
Okay.
And what is that document?
Sorry?
What is that document?
This is the document I mentioned before. It's a statement of confidentiality for an out-of-competition
And is
collection.
that completed for the DCA that was involved in this sample collection?
Yes. The doping control assistant for that specific doping control officer.
And do you know, was that form uploaded into IDTM system as a hard copy, or was it a paperless form that was completed online?
Obviously, this is it's a paper document signed by hand. by hand. However, I cannot say for sure exactly when it was uploaded to the system. However, considering it was signed in January 2018, probably as soon as we received the original document and the electronic scanned copy by email. So I would say early February.
And do you know whether the DCO that was involved in the sample collection on 4 September, as of 4 September 2018, did that DCO have any version of that form, statement of confidentiality, that could have been completed online?
No, at that date there were no electronic paperless statement of confidentialities.
Now, do you know whether the DCA involved in the 4 September 2018 collection had witnessed the collection of urine samples for sample collection prior to that date?
Yes, we, first of all, when this was signed in relation to a mission, and the doping control assistant had to sign this in order to witness for the first time a sample collection. And we have some evidence of other doping control tests that the assistant participated to.
And do you recall the approximate dates or on which the DCA had previously witnessed urine sample collection for IDTM?
I would say early 2018. I cannot say exact dates. January, definitely, and probably February, and could be others.
And does IDTM have doping control forms in its records for that sample collection in early 2018?
Yes, most certainly we have the doping control forms with the doping control assistant's signature.
And does the DCA's signature appear on those forms?
Yes.
In the sample collection on 4 September 2018, did the DCA sign the paperless doping control form that evening?
Yes, the doping control assistant signed a paperless doping control form.
And does that, does a copy of the paperless doping control form appear at tab 29 of the volume you're looking at?
I couldn't understand, sorry.
If you turn to number 29.
Yes.
Is that a copy of the paperless doping control form?
Yes, it seems so. It's a bit not very good quality, but yes, this seems to be the form.
Now, in your statement dated 8 November 2018, I think that's tab 15, you indicate that, and I'm quoting now, that seeing that the athlete is not responsive to anything, we tried to explain we are not allowed to leave anything from a test behind us in order to use this excuse to extract the samples out of that situation and leave. Can you tell us more about what your thought process when that was discussed that night?
Yes. Seeing the situation escalated to a bit of a difficult level, I realized, or it was quite obvious at some point that the athletes and his entourage would not allow the doping control team to leave with the samples and send the samples to the laboratory. So as a last attempt to try to manage to take the samples out and send them to the laboratory, I tried to make use of one of IDTM's protocols to not leave any sample collection materials behind the test because that could leave traces for a test. As I said before, maybe being in a heat of the moment, I might have used the word excuse, but it's mostly a reason, a last try to manage to take the samples away.
That's all I have. I'll pass the witness.
Mr. Popper, my name's Ian Meeky, and I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm counsel for Sun Yang. So, as the chairman put to you, you were giving advice on the telephone to the DCO on the night in question. You weren't actually present. You were actually in another country, weren't you?
No, I was not present.
Right. Where were you, in fact?
I was in Stockholm, Sweden.
Right. Can you turn to tab 31, please, which is in the third bundle, tab 31.
Yes?
Okay. This is a letter of authority, and we've just heard some testimony about that. Here, FINA delegated to IDTM to carry out of-competition testing for urine and blood. You accept, would you not, that this document does not mention who the officers are who are authorized or mention the athlete?
Yes, it doesn't mention athletes or specific officers. It mentions the testing authority and who they authorize.
Yes, that's right. Now, can you turn to tab 56, which is in the smallest of the bundles that are before you?
Smallest of the bundles. Let's see. Is this one? No, 1, 2, 3.
Tab 56.
Thank you for the help. Yes?
This is a letter of authorization from FINA, and this specifically mentions the DCO.
Yes, there is a DCO here.
You see that?
Yes.
And are you aware that that document was not shown to Sun Yang on the night in question when you were on the telephone?
This document was not shown.
No. So to be clear, tab 31 was shown and tab 56 wasn't.
31. Yes.
That's the letter of authority I just showed you.
Yeah, so I have letter of authority here.
Now, the reason I ask this question is because, as you may or may not know, there's an issue in this case with regard to letter of authority and letter of authorization. Okay? And you were on the telephone advising the DCO, and she was telling you what she had done vis-a-vis notifying the athlete.
Yes.
And she has said that she showed a letter of authority, she showed her IDTM card, and she showed the nursing certificate of the blood nurse and just a normal Chinese ID for the DCA. Okay? Now I want to be clear because I've been told by my Chinese colleagues that in translation with regard to Chinese there can be some confusion between a letter of authority and a letter of authorization. And in this case we say it's critical that a letter of authorization should have been shown in order to respect the rules. Now, because you were on the telephone advising the DCO who was present, I just want to be clear with you that you understood when you were advising her that she had in fact shown a letter of authority at tab 31 and not a letter of authorization which appears at tab 56. Can you just confirm that? That is your understanding?
I confirm the DCO followed instructions from the client and from me and showed tab 31, yes, letter of authority from FINA.
Right, okay, so that's good. Thank you. Now, if you go to the binder where you've got the letter open, tab 31, if you can go to tab 35.
35. Okay.
Yeah, you'll see there, doping control authorization. So, this is an example, okay? It's not directly relevant to Sun Yang, but we've put it in the file because it shows that there is an authorization for an out-of-competition test to take place in the month of March 2019 on a particular athlete, and the sample collection authority is Clerigium AS. Do you see that on the form?
I have seen this document before.
You've seen it, okay. And then underneath we've got the doping control officers who show that they have their form, their card, and also their ID. So you would accept, would you not, that this constitutes identifiable accreditation when shown to an athlete in an out-of-competition testing? You would accept that, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm not really to speculate what's correct to show or not. I could also say that this one only considers one of the doping control officers. I think that's not okay in this case, if that's an argument. However, client instructions from FINA are saying that we have to provide the letter of authority from FINA. We provided that. We did hundreds of tests with the same principle. We never shown any Adams letter of authorization. So from my opinion, we had all the documents required according to the instructions.
Can you turn to tab 52, please?
Yes?
Are you familiar with the WADA guidelines?
Somehow familiar, yes.
So, on page 17, if you can turn to page 17.
Okay.
And then you see at the top evidence of accreditation, and then below that you see authorization letter. You see that? And it says,
yes.
You follow me, right? In the absence of a sample collection authority issued photo ID, the chaperone may use government issued photo ID accompanied by a sample collection authority authorization letter. Now, I just want to understand your understanding of this, this provision, because we've interpreted it to mean that in order for the three persons who tested Sun Yang, there should have been a letter of authorization, not a letter of authority. It's not written letter of authority here, it's written authorization letter. Okay, so you need an authorization letter which will spell out who the DCO is, and if it sets out who the DCA and the BCA are, then you just need some ID, government issued photo ID. But if it doesn't, if you only have the mention of the DCO, which is in the FINA letter of authorization for Sun Yang, which by the way wasn't shown because you've just testified, you understood it was tab 31 was shown, the letter of authority, not the letter of authorization. But what this provision says, does it not, is that if they are not mentioned on the authorization letter, they've got to show the sample collection authority issued photo ID, doesn't it?
IDTM follows ISTIs. To my opinion, guidelines are not mandatory, and however, I'm really not in position to interpret guidelines. If I'm familiar with them, I'm familiar with them on my own.
Okay, I'll stop you there because that wasn't my question. My question was in relation to what was shown to Sun Yang. And you were on the telephone, so I appreciate you weren't there, but you were on the telephone giving advice, and I want to be clear that you understood what was happening on the ground in Hangzhou that night, okay? So, what was shown to Sun Yang was tab 31, which was a letter of authority, which you say is okay. We disagree, but you say is okay. The DCO showed her IDTM card. The nurse showed a certificate saying she was a nurse, not a practicing certificate, but a junior nurse certificate. And the urine officer showed only his ID. Now, what we are saying is that what this provision requires is that there has got to be identifiable accreditation for the athlete to be properly notified. And the urine officer showed photo ID, but no connection with IDTM whatsoever. Even if he had one, it wasn't shown to the athlete, correct?
Again, we showed everything that we were supposed to show under IDTM's protocol.
That wasn't my question. My question was that the urine officer only showed his Chinese ID to the athlete, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the nurse showed a nursing certificate, but didn't show any connection with IDTM either, did she?
She showed her nursing certificate, yes.
A nursing certificate. Now, you may not be aware, but yesterday she testified, and she testified that she doesn't possess an IDTM card at all.
Yes, they don't require an IDTM card.
Well, I put it to you, sir, that on the basis of our I put it to you, sir, that in this paragraph, in the WADA guidelines, what is required is a connection between your organization and identifiable accreditation so the athlete can be properly notified.
Question?
1 second. And now I'd like to take you to your second report, which is at tab 15.
Yeah?
You make some remarks about people rushing. You say that Sun Yang rushed out of the doping testing room. Now, you weren't present, were you? So I'm assuming you got that from somebody else, didn't you?
Yes, my supplementary report here is based on what the doping control officer had told me.
Right. And in the nurse's testimony, she also mentioned people rushing about. But when she testified, she tried to correct that a little bit by saying that she tried to follow the athlete. And I put it to her and I put it to you that, and the reference just for the record, but I won't take you there because I don't have time, it's tabs 39 to 45, show nothing of the sort. Nobody's rushing anywhere. Nobody's following anybody. Everybody's acting completely calmly. So you've just copied what the DCO has told you and what is completely refuted by the video footage of the evening, correct?
I cannot comment on this as clearly I'm not really aware of the blood collection assistant testimony and so on.
Okay. In your second report, and you were questioned about this on direct, you said there was an excuse. We tried to explain, if I just take you to the wording, we tried to explain that we are not allowed to leave anything from a test behind us in order to use this excuse to extract the samples out of that situation and leave. You remember that?
2 minutes, Mr. Meeking.
Yes, I've just been told that by my colleague sitting next to me.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I have to be brief, but you say, I believe at this point that the destruction of the samples came into discussion. So what that is saying, isn't it, is that you were advising the DCO to incite or even induce the athlete to separate his blood from the equipment, correct?
Not at all.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's not what it says in your statement.
No, that's not what I say. Doping control
Okay, I'll stop you there.
Please let me continue.
Please, I'm asking the questions. You've answered it.
Excuse me. Objection. I think the witness ought to be allowed to answer the question.
You will have opportunity on redirect.
Maybe Mr. Meekin will continue to ask his question. Maybe there will be another counter question
Thank you.
to allow the witness.
And I'm on my last question, sir. You gave the advice, and you say this in your testimony in report number 2, you gave the advice to the DCO to get as many proofs, including signatures, as possible. You remember that?
Yes, I asked the doping control officer to recover as many proof as possible, as this ended up as a possible failure to comply.
Yeah, and tab 32, if I may just have your confirmation.
32. Okay.
Tab 32, it's 2 pages, one in Chinese and one in English. So when you advised the DCO to get as many signatures as possible, actually what happened was that everybody present, and I appreciate you weren't, but everybody present signed this document basically saying that the test had been aborted, correct?
I asked the doping control officer to create a document as part of the doping control test, which would be signed in the presence of everyone, not to agree with the document, but in order to prove that was what was said.
You can plead all you like, but it's for the tribunal to decide how to interpret this document. But when you said to the DCO, get as many signatures and proofs, what ended up happening was that everybody at 3 o'clock in the morning signed off on a text, which is contemporaneous, saying the test had been aborted because people were not accredited, correct?
I don't understand Chinese, so I'm really not aware what that document
No, turn
is
the page, it's in English, over the page.
Last question.
You are aware that your DCO signed this, are you?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meekin. I move to FINA, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Popa, can you please take tab 50? This is the water urine sample collection guidelines.
Yes?
Are you familiar with this document?
Sorry?
Are you familiar with this document?
Yes, to some extent.
And does your BCOs and BCAs educated with this document?
Sorry?
The information that are passed on to your BCOs, the education that is passed to the BCOs, is it according to this document?
Our doping control officers, assistants, and blood collection assistant training is following international standards. Guidelines are, again, not mandatory.
Okay, so this is the same for the blood collection guidelines, which is tab 51. The same answer, okay. Now, I will just ask questions about the process which was followed to select Mr. Yang, and from the moment it was selected by FINA until the notification. So, do you accept that the first step of the process was for FINA to decide that a certain number of Chinese swimmers had to be testing during a certain period of time, and that this information was passed to IDTM? So it is FINA who decided which athletes would be tested?
Yes, FINA is providing us with, or used to provide us with a test pool.
Okay. And then the second step, and I think you mentioned it before, was for IDTM, you in this case, to create a mission order.
Yes.
I think this is tab 55. Please take tab 55.
55. Let's see. Okay.
Just a second, I am looking for it. So could you please explain us what is this document?
This seems to be a mission order from Adams.
Yeah. And what information are on this document?
Well, it's pretty much all the information regarding to the test, laboratory type of analysis, doping control officers, testing authority, to name a few.
Okay. And who is the addressee of this document?
Sorry?
Who is the addressee? Who is supposed to use this document?
This is just for the doping control officer and for the one who coordinates the test. Later on, probably the laboratory can use it, and of course the federation.
Okay. And this is a document that is so created by IDTM on behalf of FINA.
Yes.
Okay. And do you accept that the next step is for Adams to automatically generate the doping control authorization, which is the document on page 56?
56?
Tab 56.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
56, yes?
Okay. Do you know what is this document?
Yes.
Who are the addressees of this document?
This document seems to be if I would say from what's written on it, it would be athletes, coaches, administrators, athlete support personnel, and some others.
Okay, thank you. And the last step, the last formal step, is for the DCO to create a doping control form. What is the next step after the mission order has been transmitted to the DCO?
Well, DCO prepares for the mission, and once the athlete is notified, either is on a paper form with a notification, or it can be done on the paperless system now.
Okay. So she fills in the doping control form to prepare for the mission?
No. First of all, DCO checks whereabouts, finds where the athlete is, checks all the mission order details. Once at the location, notifies the athletes, and if athlete is notified, then...
But when is the doping control form filled in by the DCO? With all the information?
Which part of the doping control form?
With the information about the athletes, the type of test, the name of the BCA, etc.
Well, again, are you referring to a paper form or a paperless test?
Paperless.
For the paperless test, once the mission is approved by the coordinator, all information is passed to the paperless system. So the doping control officer can select the athlete to test.
So this is an automatic process?
Yes, it's an automatic process that exports the data.
And do you accept that this document is an IDTM document, the doping control form?
It depends, I assume.
It is.
I believe that
29.
once it's signed by the athlete, it becomes a FINA document.
It's tab 29.
29?
Can you please name the organization that is
that
is mentioned at the head of the document?
Can you please
the name of the organization that is mentioned at the head of the document?
Yes.
This is the IDTM.
Yes.
Okay. Two last questions. On this document, The blood collection assistant is mentioned under the wording blood collection officer. Why is it not mentioned under the box blood collection assistant?
On which document are you referring to?
Still the doping control form.
The doping control form. Doping control officer in this case and assistant, they are one and the other the same?
Just the same. But what do you make the difference? What is the difference between a blood collection officer and a blood collection assistant?
Doping control assistant is strictly responsible for parts of the blood collection, not the whole doping control process.
Okay. And the blood collection officer?
The blood collection officer could perform a full test, including blood, by himself or herself.
Do they receive the same education from IDTM?
Doping control officers, they get the full education, and doping control assistants, they can be trained for specific parts of the doping control process.
And who is providing this education?
The training is provided by the doping control officer, which is all trained in doing so.
Okay. Thank you. No further
Thank
questions.
you. Thank you very much. Back to Mr. Reichner. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Papa, the Athletes Council asked you a question about whether, based on your statement, you had induced the athlete to actually separate the vials of blood from the blood sample containers, and then he didn't allow you to answer that. Can you go ahead and finish your answer on that question?
Yes. What I wanted to say, and I couldn't continue, is that the doping control officer had informed me that the athlete and the entourage are suggesting that they would like to keep the samples and not let them take the samples, sealed samples we are talking, and send them to the laboratory. And saying that we try to induce that, it's not something that I could say or I'm aware of that. And even so, I could even mention that it's so hard for me to believe that an athlete of Sun Yang's level and his entourage could destroy sealed blood samples and take them to keep them. Yeah.
And after that point in time in which my colleague, Mr. Meekin, indicated that the sample collection process had been aborted, you actually sent an email to the DCO with refusal instructions. Is that right?
Yes. Once it was obvious that the test became a bit out of control, I instantly, or soon after, sent the refusal instructions to the doping control officer and informed her to make the athlete aware or try as much as possible, and the doping control officers are trained in that way to make the athlete aware that this can be considered a failure to comply and might be considered as a refusal.
And with respect to the documentation...
Sorry to interrupt, sir, but I didn't actually ask him a question about that on cross-examination.
So
Yeah, it is true. We recognize.
with respect to...
So this is now a redirect on matters that did not arise in my cross. I just raise it.
It is a different question. Please.
Thank you. So with respect to the documentation that was shown during the sample collection, did that notification documentation follow IDTM's standard protocol for sample collection?
Yes, the documentation followed IDTM's protocol and more so FINA instructions As the instructions are asking us to show a letter of authority, we had one. We never used an advance authorization letter. There was no point to escalate. From my role there, I was not considering that there is any other required document specifically asked to be shown.
And was that same notification protocol that was used on 4 September
Yes, it
also,
was.
also followed, would have been the same protocol that was followed for every test of Mr. Sun Yang that was done by IDTM?
To my knowledge, there was only one occasion that this protocol was not followed, and this was mentioned in the evidence for this case. Except that I believe all, to my best of knowledge, all the other tests followed exactly the same protocol.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. It's okay. Please, Mr. Sands, question.
Very brief. Thank you, Mr. Berkeley. Your second supplement, your supplementary report, which I think is tab 15, at the bottom of the first page, you write, at this point, all forms are completed. This is the penultimate paragraph right at the bottom. At this point, all forms are completed and signed. An athlete's doctor was expected to arrive to fill in comments. Just to help someone who doesn't get involved.
I'm sorry, I couldn't clearly hear to which one which paragraph you refer.
If you go to your supplementary report, tab 15, down at the bottom of the page, the one paragraph before the end, at this point.
Okay.
All forms are completed and signed. An athlete's doctor was expected to arrive to fill in comments. Could you just explain a little bit more what you were describing there? What is the role of the doctor at this point? What comments are there for the doctor to fill in?
In all doping control, doping control forms, paperless or on paper, the athletes, the representatives, the coaches, doctors, they have a right to give comments, supplementary comments, any mentions they might have. And if athlete requires or people present in this test require to write such, doping control officers have to comply with that request.
So the athlete is entitled to ask for his or her doctor to be present, is that correct?
Yes.
On an out-of-competition test?
Yes.
And can I just ask, in your experience, how often does that happen, that on an out-of-competition test, the doctor would be present?
It's really hard to say, depending on where the out-of-competition test might be. If it's a training camp, it could be quite common. If it's an athlete's residence, less common.
And in relation to the less common, in the relation to the forms that are filled in, how often would the doctor fill in, as you say here, comments on the form? In your experience, how often does that happen?
Not very often, to be honest. But it's again, I don't have any facts that I could say, like clear facts that could support this.
Beyond not very often, that's the most you can say, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really hard to speculate how often it happens or not.
You shouldn't speculate. You shouldn't speculate.
Exactly.
You said
Thank
already,
you.
I have no facts. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for
you.
your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
We can ask Mr. Söderström to enter the room, please. Please, Mr. Söderström, take a seat. Thank you very much for coming. At the beginning of your testimony, I remind you, of course, that you have to answer depending on facts, events, and while avoiding any kind of speculations, and of course tell us all the truth. With that, I give the floor to Water Council, who is Mr. Young? No, Mr. Reichner, please.
Good morning, Mr. Soderstrom.
Good morning.
How long have you been employed at IDTM?
I've been working for IDTM since 2006.
And what is your current position?
I am currently the Client Relations and Business Development Manager.
And in that position, are you familiar with sample collection done by IDTM for FINA?
I am, yes.
And does IDTM collect samples on behalf of FINA, where FINA is the testing authority under the World Anti-Doping Code?
Yes.
And for how many years has IDTM collected samples for FINA?
Since 1995.
And let's say, taking time period the last 6 years or so, so for the years 2012 through 2018, did IDTM consistently use the same protocol for FINA as far as documentation that would be shown to athletes for sample collection?
Yes, we did.
And so that same documentation protocol would have been used every time during that time period when IDTM tested Mr. Sun Yang?
That's correct.
And is that the same protocol that you understand was followed on 4 September 2018?
Yes, it was.
Now, did that protocol for that IDTM used for FINA ever include a letter that would identify the specific athlete being tested or the names of the specific sample collection personnel?
No. Never.
During that same time period, do you know whether FINA was aware or not of the documentation protocol that IDTM used to notify athletes for the purposes of sample collection?
Yes, we sent the documents that we used to FINA in the May of 2017 for a water compliance questionnaire, and again in the end of 2017 for the following year's documents, 2018.
And if you could get a little closer to the mic when you answer.
Sorry.
So did FINA ever indicate that it did not consider IDTM's notification protocol insufficient?
No.
Did FINA ever request IDTM to make any changes to IDTM's notification protocol for testing for FINA?
Not that I'm aware of.
Let's discuss the 2018 time period. Do you know approximately how many samples IDTM collected for FINA in 2018?
We collected around 3,200 samples for FINA.
I'm sorry, how many?
3,200 for FINA.
And does FINA provide IDTM with an annual letter each year for purposes of providing authority to IDTM for testing?
Yes. Prior to the start of testing for that particular year, we will receive a FINA letter of authority.
And if you could look at tab 8 in the notebook in front of you.
Yes.
Is that the letter from FINA for 2018?
Yes, it is.
And was that the annual letter from FINA that was shown by IDTM's doping control officers to the athlete for each of those 3,000 or so samples collected for FINA in 2018?
Yes, this document was provided for each DCO, and they would show it before each mission.
Prior to the challenge by the athlete in this case, had FINA ever told IDTM that that annual letter was not sufficient for purposes of sample collection?
No, not that I'm aware.
and prior to the challenge by the athlete in this case, had FINA ever directed or authorized IDTM sample collection personnel to show athletes the specific atoms authorization for the test?
No, not that I'm aware of.
During 2018, did IDTM collect samples for other sport federations and national anti-doping organizations using the same notification protocol that was used on 4 September 2018?
Yes, we did.
And approximately how many other sport federations and national anti-doping organizations did IDTM use that same notification protocol?
There was about approximately 30 in total.
And including sample collections for FINA, can you tell us approximately how many total samples IDTM collected in 2018 using that same notification protocol with a general annual letter of authority?
There was approximately 19,000 samples collected.
I'm sorry, how many?
19,000.
Okay. And prior to the challenge by the athlete in this case, had any sports federation or national anti-doping organization ever told IDTM that its notification protocol was not sufficient?
No, not that I'm aware of, no.
And prior to the challenge by the athlete in this case, had any athlete objected or suggested that the yearly letter from the sport federation or national anti-doping organization was not sufficient to show that the IDTM sample collection team was authorized to collect samples?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I'll pass the witness.
Please, Mr. Meekin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, the report at tab 16, which is before you, the report is written by Miss Jenny Johansson. It's not written by you, is it?
Number 16, did you say? Oh, this one, okay.
Tab 16 and the witness bundle.
That's a different bundle than he has in front of him.
Sorry?
That's not the same one that he had in front of him.
It's bundle number 1, tab 16.
Thank you. Sorry.
This is an IDTM report written by Jenny Johansson. It's not written by you, is it?
No, it's...
So you haven't provided any written evidence in this case at all?
That's
so
correct.
Jenny Johansson before FINA, before the FINA doping panel provided this, and I questioned her on it. I saw her earlier this morning, and she's not sitting there, which is surprising, because you're sitting there and you haven't provided a written report prior to giving your evidence here today. So it would have been helpful, I just state for the record, that had you produced a written statement, then I could have questioned you on it. As it is, I've got to question you on your testimony in direct, for which we have no documentary evidence.
And I'll state for the record. I'll state for the record that we.
Please don't interrupt.
That we did submit general description of what he would testify about, and in accordance with CAS rules.
We don't have a witness statement from him. What is in the bundle here is a document from IDTM, which was not written by him. You say, you have asked questions about the letter of authority. And you said you were led to say that this was shown to all our athletes. But you haven't provided any evidence to prove that, have you? There's nothing in the file to suggest that what you've just told the tribunal is correct. In fact, there's nothing in the report written by Jenny Johansson either, is there?
Correct.
Correct. So now, I'd like you to turn to tab 21, please, which is in binder number 3. Tab 21. Now, I appreciate you're maybe seeing this for the first time, but this is a document written by a colleague of yours,
Okay.
and it was submitted in the FINA doping panel proceedings. It's a report by IDTM. If you can turn to page 2, which is Bates number W001759. You see that?
Yes.
And if you look at the second full paragraph starts, his doctor was present. You see that?
I do.
Okay. And then the last two sentences, I told him several times that I was the DCO in charge for this mission. I showed him everything upon notification, my DCO ID, FINA letter of authority, individual authorization by FINA. You see that?
Yes, I do.
So that's a colleague of yours showing an athlete an individual authorization by FINA, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
But he did not follow the protocols that we had sent him in this case.
Right. Now, I'd like to now turn to tab 56, which is in the smallest binder. It's not at the end of that one. It's actually in another one. It's in the smallest binder in front of you. It's the first exhibit.
Yep.
Tab 56. This is a doping control authorization, and it's specific on the part of FINA for Sun Yang to be tested. Do you see that?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So that is the individual authorization by FINA, isn't it? I appreciate it's not the same document that was shown to Mr. Sun Yang at the time, because this is the individual authorization for the test that took place in November of 2018. Your colleague is talking about a test which took place a year earlier. So I'm just questioning this witness from IDTM because his colleague seems to be saying something different to what he's just said in direct. So this letter is a doping control authorization specific to Sun Yang for the test, and that is individual authorization by FINA, correct?
FINA have not given us permission to use this document. We have, until the end of 2018, used the yearly letter of authority for FINA. The document that I'm looking at here is the Adams authorization, I believe.
I put it to you, sir. Sir, that the individual authorization by FINA is exactly what we see at tab 56. And that was not shown to the athlete. I appreciate you were not there. You haven't provided any evidence, whether you were there or not even of your opinion, apart from what you've replied on direct. But I put it to you that that document should have been shown to Sun Yang on the night of 5th of November 2018 and wasn't.
Given that FINA have never consulted us about this and instructed us to use this document.
Sorry, could you move closer because it's difficult for us to hear.
Given that FINA have never consulted us and instructed us to use this document, they have provided a yearly FINA letter of authority each year. And this document has never been discussed with FINA as far as I'm aware. And if we, as IDTM, shouldn't be using documents that FINA are not aware of, as we provided the documents that we show at the end of 2017 for the 2018 season, and this document was not included in that batch of documents that we would show to the athletes.
Well, we humbly disagree. I'd like you to now move to tab just bear with me 1 second. Sorry, bear with me. No. Tab 52, sorry for the delay. Tab 52. It's right at the back of bundle 3.
Sorry. I'm sorry, is this the document you're referring to?
It's the water guidelines.
This is one, okay, thank you.
Can you turn to page 17, please?
Okay, sorry.
And this talks about evidence of accreditation. You see that?
Yes.
And the second paragraph starts with authorization letter. In the absence of a sample collection authority-issued photo ID, the chaperone may use government-issued photo ID accompanied by a sample collection authority authorization letter. Now that's with regard to chaperones. Okay, so
I'm sorry, what document is this?
it's the paragraph authorization letter. Do you see that?
Okay. Yes, I see it.
You see it?
I just wanted to see which
You've never seen it before?
I've seen this before, but I wanted to know which document this was.
So you're on the right paragraph, authorization letter. Right. So what that means, doesn't it, is that there should be an individual authorization letter, there should be some ID, either connecting the chaperone with the sample collection authority. Okay?
Yes.
So if there's an individual authorization letter which includes the names of the chaperones plus some ID, that's okay. Or if they're not expressly mentioned on the individual authorization letter, they have to have a sample collection authority issued photo ID, right? That's what it says. Are you aware of the fact that the nurse who came to test Sun Yang did not have an IDTM card?
I believe that in the statement that my colleague has answered this already.
Well, I'm asking you because you're on the stand.
Okay. Well, in the statement that she's given, I think...
Well, no, I just tell you, because you weren't in attendance at the hearing in camera yesterday, that the nurse admitted that she did not have an IDTM ID card. Okay? So all she produced was a certificate of her practice, not a practicing certificate, but a nursing qualification. Okay? And the DCA, who has refused to come and testify, he only produced his Chinese ID. Again, no connection whatsoever with the sample collection authority. So that's in breach of this rule, isn't it?
The letter of authority that
No,
we
that's not my
received
question. My question was, based on what I've just told you, and I appreciate you weren't there yesterday, but based on what I've told you, and in application of the water guidelines regarding authorization letter, what's written here was not fulfilled, correct?
The guidelines are just that, guidelines.
Right,
They are not
but the DCAs...
they're not mandatory. It's the WADA ISTI that is mandatory.
So we'll let the tribunal decide what weight they're going to give to the WADA guidelines. Okay, that's not for you to opine on. But it's true that, is it not, that the ISTI regulations don't actually deal with BCAs and DCAs anyway, do they?
That's correct. We've
That's correct. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Vitto, you have 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Soderstrom. First question, is IDTM still the sample collection authority for FINA?
Yes, we are. But we work through the International Testing Agency.
Okay. And you've said earlier that there is a notification protocol for IDTM and that it was provided to FINA in some occasions. Could you please repeat here?
There was one occasion in the May of 2017 when they needed the documents for the WADA compliance questionnaire. And that was sent in May, and then we sent the documents again in the December of 2017 for the 2018 year.
Okay. So this document was also provided to WADA?
It was FINA who had contacted us for these documents, and we sent them directly to FINA.
Okay. And you said also that other sports federations, 30 other sports federations, use the same protocol?
That's correct, yes. Just the yearly letter of authority, not the Adams.
Okay. But is there a document attesting the protocol that you are following?
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Is there a document, an actual document, where is written what is actually exactly to be produced by the DCOs? The protocol, this protocol, it
yes,
exists?
that has been sent to FINA, stating what needs to be shown.
Okay. Talking about the letter of authority, which, according to your protocol, is to be shown by the DCO to the athlete, if the sample collection authority is also the testing authority, and there is no letter of authority, what is the document that needs to be shown to the athlete by the DCO?
Sorry, I didn't understand. I'm sorry.
This is tab number 8, the letter of authority. It is a letter from FINA authorizing IDTM to conduct sample collection on its behalf.
Correct.
Mr. Vito, please don't ask the witness about speculating, or only stick to the facts.
Okay,
Please.
but when the testing authority is also the sample collection authority, then you don't have. So next, yeah. So what is so you are the sample collection authority, but sometimes there is a testing authority who is also the sample collection authority. Do you agree?
Object on
Yeah,
speculation. I mean,
It's a legal question, and this witness is not a fact witness at all.
Are you aware that sometimes the testing authority is also the sample collection authority?
I can't speculate because IDTM are never the testing authority.
Okay, no, I will not insist on this question.
The witness confirms he cannot talk about different agencies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is an IDTM accredited DCO authorized to conduct a doping control on a specific athlete without a mission order?
Without a mission order?
Basically,
do you mean to show the mission order?
Is a DCO allowed to conduct a doping control without instructions from IDTM?
We always create a mission order in Adams.
Okay. So a DCO who does not have a mission order is not authorized to conduct a sample collection on an athlete.
Correct. He will need an M number for the reference.
Okay. And if I take you to tab number 12, this is the statement of Ms. Johansson.
Sorry, could you repeat? I couldn't hear you.
Tab number 12, the statement of Ms. Johansson. Bundle 1. Yes, 16.
What book was it? I'm sorry. Was it
The bundle 1.
Number 1?
Yeah, tab 16. Thank you for this.
I apologize for this.
So on page 2, she states that Article 533 ISTI is intended to ensure that an athlete knows that the people doing the test are authorized to test him or her. Do you agree?
Sorry, where did you read that?
I would. It's the third paragraph, the second paragraph under IDTM's interpretation. You
Yes.
go to the second.
Okay. Yep.
It's written, the
yes,
IDTM
sorry.
considers that its interpretation
yes, that's
is
correct, yes,
consistent.
yes.
Okay. So do you agree with such statement?
Do I?
Do you agree with such statement? That
Yes.
the article is intended to ensure that an athlete knows that the people doing the test are authorized to test him.
Yes.
And you just said that a DCO without a mission order is not authorized to conduct a sample collection.
I need to clarify here what a mission order is. There might be a misunderstanding what a mission order is and what a letter of authority is.
Okay, yeah.
The mission order is when you create a mission in Adams, a mission is created, a standard mission. That mission order should never be shown to any athlete,
Okay.
only the yearly letter of authority.
But my question is, the mission order is necessary to allow the DCO to act, to do the sample collection, correct?
Yes, this means he can access the whereabouts to the athlete. He has the generated M number.
But, and if she does not have this document, which is the instructions from IDTM.
Yes, and in this case, I understand from seeing the Adams authorization form.
But
that
if she
did.
doesn't have this document, she is not authorized to test an athlete. She cannot just go by herself to conduct a sample collection on an athlete. Do you follow me?
Not really, because
Well, I'm going to try to rephrase.
when a DCO conducts a
For each testing mission, the DCO receives
Yes.
the instruction from IDTM
Yes.
to conduct the sample. If these instructions does not exist, the DCO is not authorized to conduct a sample collection on an athlete. Correct?
I'm not fully with you because the
Does a DCO
yes,
have the right?
Okay,
Yes.
yes.
Does a DCO have the right? Oh, so you said yes, but tomorrow. Okay. So that's. I think that was my last question. Thank you.
Now back to Mr. Reichner, 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your answers. We can now stop for lunch. I would kindly ask you to make a bit shorter our lunch break in order to be back in the room at 1:45, since we are a bit late. Thank you very much.